What is your best strategy for achieving growth? Today, I'm going to discuss some basic principles for growth and also make a few key distinctions which I believe are often underestimated, if not entirely neglected, when pursuing personal growth or self actualization. I'm Clark Korb, a holistic health practitioner offering you some pragmatic insights to help you live a happier, more empowered life and embody your optimum potential. So, just in case there's a question, why should I want to grow? I thought I would link this to the concept of self actualization, which is defined as the realization or fulfillment of one's talents and potentialities, especially considered as a drive or need present in everyone. To realize your full potentiality carries an implicit requirement that you grow in the area of self development. Otherwise, your potentialities just remain potential, unrealized. Let's talk about what's required for growth. And I figured the simple way of starting off with this would be to look at an analogy for the physical growth of organisms. We can all, I think, relate to that from our own schooling and observations in life empirically. The first need would be to have some sort of safe and hospitable environment. Plants need sunlight and a temperate climate, for example. The second need would be basic nutrients that form building blocks. Plants get nutrients from soil. They also require water and light. Humans, when in the womb, have nutrients passed via the mother's umbilical cord, and then once born, they're either consuming breast milk or baby formula as highly bioavailable food, macro and micronutrients, until they can begin chewing food on their own. So the third need for growth is a blueprint of some sort for what to build, how to build, and in what direction to build. Plants have a seed that contains genetic information that's planted in that soil, and humans have DNA that contains our genetic information, the blueprint from which to build everything in our bodies. The fourth need for growth is an agent of action. Plants have cells that undergo cell division, humans have cell division, and ultimately tissue, organ, and system differentiation. And finally, the last need for growth that I'm identifying here is the need for space in which to expand. Plants need sufficient depth of soil for the roots to drop in and provide a foundation, as well as space for the branches and leaves to extend. In humans, the embryo grows into an expanding fetus, and once born, a baby grows through childhood, adolescence, and fills out fully into an adult frame over the course of a couple of decades. In both cases, the plant and human require enough physical space to actually expand. So, in extending these requirements for basic physical growth to the analogy applied to self development or self actualization, I think there's a lot we can glean from this. So, that first need for growth, number one, a safe and hospitable environment. In the form of self development or self actualization, this really means eliminating toxic elements from your environment. This might mean some people or relationships that you need to cull or limit or eliminate altogether, consuming media or influences that are not serving you, or anything physically that's not supportive. This might be relating to dietary or substance abuse, the basic idea of cleaning out anything that's a toxic element within your environment. Growth need number two would be nutrients that form basic building blocks. In this case, this really originates with belief systems. I did a video earlier on cultivating your beliefs, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And one of the key distinctions I mentioned earlier in this case is evaluating any sabotaging beliefs that you might have specific to the concept of growth. If you've ever heard the statement, aren't you happy with what you already have? When is enough enough? Now, you may not actually say that sort of thing yourself, but if you've had an early influence in your life, say that a parent or a teacher or a partner or a family member, something like that, this can have a significant impact that you might not be aware of on what would cause your own limitation or inability to accept growth or define growth to be something positive. If you think about this, and not to be too silly about it, but nobody asks these questions of a plant or a tree or a toddler. No one says to a toddler, haven't you grown enough already? Isn't one or two steps at a time enough? So I realize it sounds a little silly, but the basic idea is that growth is natural, healthy, and it's expected. So growth, especially in the realm of finances, people tend to think if you're growing financially, it's the same as greed, and it is not. Similarly, some people tie healthy production to exploitation. Greed and exploitation have nothing to do with healthy growth and production. One of my favorite authors, Esther Hicks, has a thread that's been very common to her teaching over decades. Is something to the effect of, I'm not ever going to get it done. I'm an eternally expanding being. I'm doing great where I am, and I'm eager about what's coming. So in other words, I'm satisfied where I'm at, and I'm eager for more. So, built into those statements, there is an appreciation for the present and a desire for growth, which are not contradictory. Being appreciative for what you have doesn't mean you can't also desire expansion. In fact, a lack of desire for growth lends to complacency, which lends to laziness, atrophy, aimlessness, loss of purpose, all sorts of things. So, examining somewhere in the basement of your belief system anything that might have a sabotaging element or a belief around growth being bad, whatever the subject is, whether it's financial growth or personal growth or relationship growth. But I think especially the financial one tends to be something that is imprinted in our society a lot, that growing financially is somehow tied to greed or some other negative, pejorative connotation to it. Going back to that analogy, the third growth need is a blueprint for what or how to build and in what direction to build. So in this case, there's a requirement for an action plan specific to whatever area of personal development you're looking at. So plans in this regard don't need to be perfect, but having a direction or a vector to grow toward is critical. And with this, it's probably not news to you to start with the end goal in mind. And in particular, articulating this with clarity and precision, only the essence of what you want to manifest. If you're able to quantify certain elements where possible, that's fantastic. And in places where you can quantify a goal, it's important not to misconstrain the outcome. A simple example for this would be to look at establishing retirement income that is inflation adjusted to X dollars a month today. If you just start with that simple goal, you can work with a financial planner if you need, or a mentor to help you figure out sort of what lump sum you need to get to that, and also take into account inflation and taxes, which matter a lot in that calculation. But to start off with the essence of it makes it clear for you. If you think, well, I want to basically live the same quality of life I do now, that's X dollars a month and inflation adjusted over time when I'm retiring in whatever amount of time, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Whatever it is. Start with the basic essence and let that be the guiding light in that sense. So then chunking your action plan into digestible steps. So this action plan needs to be linked to a timeline somehow. And the second distinction that I want to make here is allowing for the possibility of nonlinear growth. And I don't think this really is addressed at all in most goal planning or growth-oriented recommendations. So in this context, nonlinear growth means that your ability to produce or your growth can increase substantially over time more than it does when you're first starting out. A lot of ways this can happen. For one, is you learn to or have the ability to delegate tasks to other people to help you out. You can employ more parallel processing depending on what's going on, where you make advances in several fronts. There's also a compounding effect. Of course, there's an example with that financially if you're familiar with time value of money calculations. But there's also this precessional effect that's described by Buckminster Fuller. And the idea with this is that any body in motion affects other bodies in motion. So if we're moving toward a goal or improving or growing ourselves in some way, we're also creating an effect upon other people. And within that, other and unanticipated positive results may be achieved that help support or accelerate your own path while you're pursuing your primary goal. And along with this is the potential for improvements in your own ever-evolving skill, your efficiency, and your shifting of belief systems that can create even more nonlinear growth, even if you have like a linear business model. In my own practices, I've observed this over the past 20 years. So going back to our analogy for what is needed for growth, the fourth thing we need, agents of action. Just like there's cell division that goes on and tissue differentiation as we're growing as babies, in the self-development area, this is our own action that we're taking. So this is akin to the statement that faith without works is dead. You can have great belief systems, but you need to have work to follow it up. In this regard, action steps need to be taken along the plan specifically directed toward growth. Now, a lot of people can keep themselves busy running in circles, but that doesn't expand your footprint. Or just like socializing in the same network doesn't expand your social influence, your actions have to be oriented specifically toward growth. And it can be helpful to have an accountability partner to keep you on track with this, to test whatever actions you're taking, to measure an outcome versus an objective, modifying the plan or the target action if necessary. I did a little video on taking inspired action, which you can incorporate into this process. I'll put a link to that in the description below as well. So beyond that element of action, the fourth growth need is space in which to expand. If you've ever had a pet fish in an aquarium, you notice that a fish will grow in proportion to the size of its tank. Its growth is actually capped to the size of its tank. And the third key distinction I wanted to make in this regard of personal growth and development is that you must actually create space for what you want. So nature abhors a vacuum. In other words, mass moves to fill a vacuum, which is another way of saying that energy likes to flow. Just creating the vacuum alone isn't enough to actually move you in the direction that you want. You can create a vacuum and clear out all the toxic crap, but it can be filled right up with other toxic crap. What really matters in this creating a vacuum is generating a reason or reasons that are aligned with your heart's desire, which justify your need to increase flow to fill this space. My observation over time is that people tend to figure things out only when they must do so. So this is linked to an inherent survival mechanism that we have. Looking at this in a financial example, you can trim the fat in a budget, for example, and that can certainly improve your net income or your ability to save or divert resources to a particular project that you're interested in, but it doesn't necessarily grow your revenues, your gross income. In order to do that, you must have a reason why your income must grow to cover your increased outflows. This is actually a great selfish reason that people often use to implement some sort of structured giving for charity. In other words, the more outflows that you generate, these requirements that you set up for why resources should be flowing into you, why your income should be increasing, you sort of set that structure up to meet it. I know it might sound a little bass-ackward, but having the expectation that you have increased outflows to account for will often create this expansion for you to generate more income to match it. It also works in the relationship realm. Think about it. Anytime you've had a new partner, a new relationship, or a new dependent, or even a pet, it requires you to expand your emotional capacities, to consider the needs of others, and manage your priorities and energy a bit differently. It's the same thing in either way. So the point of all this is there's significant value to taking a step of expanding your space first to create the vacuum. And one way to help create that vacuum or that need to flow is a justifiable reason that's aligned with something that's really important to you as to why you must improve flowing more. And I'm saying flowing just in general for you can fill in the blank for what you're wanting to flow more, whether it's more love or more connection with people or more financial resources. It's kind of the idea of jump and the net will appear. I did a video a while back on taking the leap of faith, and this topic is very much what I described in my own personal path along those lines. Also, this idea of burning the boats. This is making a conscious decision to move forward towards a goal and eliminate the possibility of just retreating. And so if burning the boats sounds a little bit extreme, I think a nice middle ground to move toward is to create a stretch goal. So the idea behind a stretch goal is to commit to something that is a little bit larger than you think is actually possible, or maybe even prudent. And if you have a quantifiable goal, I would suggest starting with something that's maybe 20% larger than what you think is possible right now with your current capabilities. And this is effective only if this is really aligned with something of great value to you personally. Now, I'm not suggesting abusing instruments of debt or taking on irresponsible levels of debt. The idea is to put yourself in a mindset of, well, whatever I think I can do now, what would be 20% more than what I think I could do now? A personal trainer can work with you in this regard. If you think you can do 10 reps of a current exercise in a set, do 12. Set 12 as your goal. So what this does is it helps you draw upon resources, both internally and externally, that you may not have otherwise considered or even recognized exist. It channels your focus onto a desired outcome a little more urgently, a little bit more pointedly, as opposed to the what if I fail scenarios. In my own personal examples, a few of these stretch goals were initially buying a house, quitting my job, making a career leap, starting a business, taking on a loan during my divorce to help facilitate a buyout with my ex-wife, and after that, buying a beloved sports car. What I noticed in each of these cases that were for me relatively significant life events, each of these were basically stretch goals. They all had an element of risk, and everything does to some degree. And I found that it really focused my energy very specifically, fueled either by a financial necessity or a desire for an improved emotional experience, or both. And ultimately, in each of these cases, it ended in my achieving an outcome that was greater than the initially planned milestone or minimum requirement that I needed to meet for it. And in each case, accomplishing these stretch goals helped me gain an ever-increasing confidence in my ability to meet or exceed my commitments. And I think far beyond all of these things, it generated an unexpected number of personal benefits for myself and other people, that processional effect that we talked about earlier, which made the whole experience even more rewarding than I could have initially imagined. In any case, there's always a risk-reward trade-off, and my recommendation is when there's something that's really aligned to what you desire and that is instrumental in if there's kind of an internal calling or if it's on your path, all the more reason to embrace the stretch goal for that. I'm curious to know, what area in life are you interested in growing, or what would be a desirable stretch goal for you? Let me know in the comments below. And if you know of anyone who may benefit from what I've shared here, please forward this video to them. If you found some value in what I've discussed today, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. It's free, it only takes a moment, and it really helps support the growth of the channel. Thank you so much for tuning in.